I'm Kyle Malnati, your host of the Calibrate Real Estate Podcast. At Calibrate, we exist to help people create generational wealth through real estate. My personal mission is to encourage, empower, and educate you by sharing best practices from business leaders that are proven winners. Broadcasting from the Mile High City, thank you for tuning in to the Calibrate Real Estate Podcast. Our expert guest today, Damon Yudichak, a buddy of mine that was introduced to us by someone that the Calibrate Nation knows about, Wayne Salmons, who's been on several episodes of our podcast, most notably episode 70. Wayne was kind enough, gracious enough to have me present to a coaching crew of his, and Damon was a part of that. And then as Damon and I started to get to know each other, I found out that he is the author of a franchise book called Profit First, and he's doing Profit First for real estate agents. Damon, welcome to our show.
Well, thank you very much, Colin. I'm super thrilled to be here. We've been talking about this for a couple months, and I've been waiting with bated breath to do this interview.
I'm pumped too. And I know that with the process of publishing a book, I wish I knew, in your shoes. I haven't published a book myself, but I've worked with a number of authors. You've got to be really careful about the timing of it. You obviously want to focus on the main goal, which is getting the book done. And I'm so excited to announce, and we're going to try to make sure that we push through as much as we can here, that June 29th, 2021 is the release date of Profit First for real estate agents. And Damon, what a cool experience. It's going to be great. You're going to bless a lot of people in our industry. Our real estate audience is always thinking about how they can make more profits. And I'll just share with you humbly that I know a lot of different people that are realtors, myself included, that, man, we struggle with money. And you share with us in the intro to your book that there's all these common things that happen and sort of these misconceptions. And I'm going to outline a few that meant something to me. Number one, you had shared, all I need to do is earn more money and all my money problems will be solved. The next one, more money will give me happiness. The next one, I just need to sell one more house. And then finally, you can't be rich without debt. Every one of those, and that was 4 out of 9 or 10 that you had put in the intro, every one of those really resonated with me. And let's talk about how Profit First for real estate agents really debunks a lot of those things and how we can focus on taking our profits first.
Well, the one thing I really like to think about is something that we've all heard: cash is king, right? And there's this very easy way to overthink everything, right? Money is difficult for everyone. We've all had our struggles with money. We've all had probably credit card debt that just weighed us down and all this other stuff, having to make ends meet. And the thing, as I was writing this book, and I've been, on this journey for 30 years now, is what can we do to make money as simple as possible? And really one of the premises from the book is that if you pay yourself first and spend less than you earn, you're going to make money, right? Say, if you do those two things, you're never going to run out of money. And the surest way to know that if your business is successful is, do you have more money at the end of the month than you had at the beginning of the month? And all you have to do is look at your bank account, and that'll tell you. And that's what I'm really trying to focus on, is let's get real about having cash.
I love all that. It's one of my favorite thought leaders is a guy named Dave Ramsey. Yeah. And Dave is very famous for saying, I don't think he coined this, but he says it the most. And so maybe he gets attributed to it, is that, it's God and grandma's advice, right? Mm-hmm. Have some money saved away for a rainy day. Don't spend more than you make. I mean, all of these things are so obvious. They're so fundamental, but I'll just share with you, I've had so many conversations with real estate agents that are like, yeah, you know what? Those couple of, brand new lease payments on, a $900 a month SUV, in the heart of the recession, I just couldn't avoid it. I needed to have a new car. That new car was going to help me sell more houses, whatever the excuse is. Yeah. And so for whatever reason, what makes logical sense doesn't actually practically happen. And Dave Ramsey, which obviously is not involved in this particular book, but just someone I really enjoy, says that so much of positive money success is oriented around behavior, not head knowledge. Mm-hmm. And I think it's worth saying that you entered you entered the career world as an accountant, and you're now writing a book for real estate agents about how we can profit first. Let's talk just about some of the things that we get really, mistaken advice, if you will, by, what maybe seem kind of like the highbrow, very strategic financial advice that's very sophisticated. And I think what ends up happening is we oftentimes make it way too complicated, don't we?
Absolutely. Yeah. And, I mean, one of the things that I said this for a little while is, money's not complicated. And then, actually Wayne was the one, he's like, Damon, when you tell people that, you're almost telling them that they're stupid if they don't get it. And I was like, oh, you're right. This stuff is complicated. There's so much information out there. And I think part of the problem is there's too much information. And so I think one of the things that, if we go back to some of those things you talked about at the beginning, and especially as a business owner, I've seen a lot of people, and even myself, I was really good with money before I got into business. That was because my earnings were kind of capped. So I wanted to make sure I lived within that. And then you get into business and especially you get around some very successful people, and you get the mind share and all this other stuff, and you get all motivated and excited to do really well. And then you're like, what can I do? And it almost becomes a trap where we're trying to get better and better and better, but we have that behavior. I mean, money is more behavioral than it is money, I think. I definitely agree with you there, because what happens a lot of times is as our income grows, our spending grows, right? And one of the things that we talk about in the profit world, first world, is Parkinson's law. So that as our supply of something increases, so our supply of money, as it increases, our demand for it increases. And so we really need to actually put boundaries around our spending so that we can make sure we're not spending money unwisely. And really, if we can focus on what can I do to get the best return of my money, then I'm going to do that. But I really think the first step is you got to make sure that you're paying yourself first. That, for me, whenever I ran into problems with money, a lot of times it was because I wasn't paying myself first. And then the second reason was because I was spending more than I was making.
Great advice. And one of the things that a lot of accountants will share, I got my degree in finance, so I wasn't an accounting major, but took a lot of accounting classes. Obviously, you were an accountant before being an author, is that the very simple yet misleading equation that we're all taught is income minus expenses equals profit.
Yeah.
And in this book, as well as Mike Michalowicz's original book, Profit First, you flip that equation. So for those who haven't read Profit First, the original, and then obviously, as we're talking pre-release here, Profit First for real estate agents, how do we flip that equation around?
Yeah, and I actually add on to the equation. So in Mike's book, originally, he talks about income minus profit equals expenses. And I say, no, we need to first start with owner pay, right? Because we need to make sure that we're getting paid. Let's say you were you were making, $150,000, $200,000 before you got into real estate. Because we have lots of people there's very few people that come into real estate as a first career. A lot of people are very successful beforehand. We need to make sure that we're building our business so that we're able to replicate that income. Either that, or we need to really reduce our lifestyle. The first thing I like to look at is how much do you want to get paid as an owner? Once we know that, that's our starting point. And then we say, okay, well, based on that, I need to reverse engineer what my sales need to be according to that. And then I've got to make sure that I've got some profit in there, and then also making sure that I pay my taxes. And if I get all that filled out, then I'm left with, okay, this is how much I can afford on the expenses. So I added a couple of other things from Mike's equation, but I really want to make sure that, really you can't be profitable until you make sure the owner is paid first.
Yeah, that's something that a lot of us real estate agents are guilty of. We work so hard for our clients, and we may have some staff members if you've built a team or you're maybe own your own brokerage like I do. But you work so hard, you get this commission, and then all of a sudden you're plowing it back into marketing, and you're plowing it into the next listing, and you're paying your staff, you're paying your accountant, you're paying your taxes, hopefully not in arrears. Hopefully you're paying your taxes and you've got a good account for that. And then all of a sudden you say, okay, what's left? Now this is what I can live off of. And the reality is your equation and Mike's equation says, no, you're working really diligently. You're working in a difficult business that a lot of people think you're quite frankly think that we're crazy, that we've got our risk meter is broken. And you really need to focus on that idea of profit and owner compensation first. So I think what happens though is that, okay, once someone's read Profit First, and then when they read Profit First for real estate agents, they say, okay, this makes sense. And maybe they go overboard and they start allocating too much to profit. So what are some of your suggestions, Damon, on how someone can really sort of gradually kind of dip their toe in the water as it relates to profits so that it's sustainable? Because I think that's the flip side. And all real estate agents, it's either 0 or 100 miles per hour. There is no in between. So if you're not taking any profit right now, it makes sense. Okay, let's take some profit. And then they want, 20 or 30% profitability right off the bat. And so how do you dip your toe into it and make sure it's sustainable?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, that is kind of a behavior that a lot of us have, especially as high achievers, is once we get excited about an idea, we go full board. So I'll just give you an example. I've run 7 marathons. And the first year I ran a marathon, I ran 6 that year, right? So I go all in. But there gets a point where you do run yourself into the ground if you're not doing it in a sustainable manner. So the short answer is I like to start people off with 1%. That may sound like, oh, that's boring. That's not enough. But the thing is we're going through a change process. And you're going to be a lot more successful if you do it in small steps than if you go ahead and transition all at once. And in fact, if you do too big of a change, it can be detrimental to your business because you could be cutting the wrong thing. So a good example is, let's say you've got a marketing method in place and it's giving you a $10 return for $1 of investment. If you cut that off, you're actually costing yourself $9 instead of saving $1. So it's good to just make one change at a time so that you make sure you're making the right changes. And then you give yourself a chance to see, is this giving me the result I want?
Yeah, it's great advice. And I'll say that after I read Mike's book, and I've got the original right here, you've got the working cover of Profit First for Real Estate Agents over your shoulder. And, I'll admit the first quarter of working with this, and, I'm the CEO of Calibrate Real Estate. My wife, Courtney's the CFO. And I, as she's cutting checks, she's looking at this. She's like, we're really going to cut a check for $200 to put it into an account. Like, why can't we just, pull the trigger here and cut a check for $2,000? Like that would be more meaningful. Or let's just wait until more money kind of piles up and then let's do a big profit. And those small incremental steps, the tortoise wins over the hare. Those small incremental steps every month, or as Profit First would indicate, twice a month. Mm-hmm. It seems like, man, this is a lot of work and a lot of effort. But one of the things I've observed is you don't miss that $200. You don't miss the $400. And it doesn't really cause this breakdown like you were sharing, which I think a lot of people can get overboard and do. So what's the rhythm that you suggest in Profit First for Real Estate Agents of, if someone's hearing this for the first time, they've never read either book, what's the rhythm of how you kind of get into this where you're thinking about taking profit first? I'm assuming that they're already taking an owner's comp because otherwise they wouldn't be, they'd starve out of real estate. But how does someone start profiting first?
Well, one of the biggest keys, and Profit First is built on separate bank accounts. And I like what you talked about, the 200. And I actually have a pretty cool story about that. A year ago, on the personal side, I wasn't really setting money aside in a savings account. I was doing it on my business side. And January of 2020, I had $184 in my bank account. And then COVID hit, and I was just like, let me go ahead and be a little bit more defensive and build up some cash. And so I said, I'm just going to put $100 from my personal paycheck into my savings account. And I started doing that. And then also when I got my profit bonuses, which I get once a quarter, I would put money into that. And then lo and behold, I got to January of 2021, and I had $14,000 in that savings account. I mean, I was just blown away.
That's amazing. You think you're doing $100, $200 each time, and all of a sudden you've got, this large nest egg. And I'm seeing the same thing too. All of a sudden, once you, and it's very common knowledge, but once you start to focus on something, that thing becomes the main thing, and what you focus on expands. And all of a sudden you've got all of this momentum going. So that taking that 1%, and obviously you've got separate accounts for doing this, can really be meaningful. So let's go through what those different accounts look like for someone who's never heard of Profit First. What are the different accounts? And you actually are setting up separate bank accounts. And then let's talk about the concept of how many banks to work with as well.
Yeah, that's very good. Yeah, so there's going to be 5 main bank accounts. The first one is going to be the income bank account. The income bank account is going to be where you deposit all your commissions that you get from selling homes or buying, helping your buyers. And then that collects in there. And then you're going to have an owner pay bank account. You're going to have a profit bank account. You're going to have a tax bank account, and then a operating expense bank account. I actually like to call that the business expense account. Mike McCallum in his book, Profit First, talks about OPEX. Well, and I just kind of felt like business expense. So I renamed it to business expense in my book, because that seemed to be more relatable to real estate agents. And so essentially what we're going to do is we're going to put all the money into the income bank account. And then twice a month, we're going to empty out the income account and then split that money up on a percentage basis to the other 4 accounts. And so that's at a high level. And there's 2 accounts that we talked about, the tax account and then the profit account. I like to have those at another bank. And the reason I do that is because that's really my out of sight, out of mind money. Okay, the tax money, it doesn't really belong to me. It belongs to the government. And, there's lots of people that don't want to pay taxes. I get that, but that's just part of the price of being successful. So if you don't want to pay taxes, don't make any money. That's the easiest way to not pay taxes, but I don't think that's a very good alternative. The great thing about Profit First is once you have it set up, you're actually going to set the money aside, because it's too easy, especially as a business owner. If you're getting 1099, you think all that money belongs to you, but it doesn't. We need to set aside roughly 15% of income to taxes. And we want to have it in a separate out of sight, out of mind bank, so that we're not looking at that money. Because, it's kind of like if there's chocolate chip cookies on your table right here, I'm going to eat those. And if you put 2 or 3 in front of me, I'm going to eat all of them. And then I'm going to have a bellyache. So I'm a lot better not even having chocolate chip cookies in my house.
It's like that old Michael Jackson song, The Man in the Mirror, right? I could be rich and I could be skinny if I could just control that guy in the mirror, right?
That's one of my favorite songs. Yeah.
I've got to obviously give you a tremendous shout out. I'm holding an advanced reader copy, not for distribution. And I've printed this out here of your book, Profit First for Real Estate Agents. For those that are listening in on Apple Podcasts, which is our main area of focus for the podcast audience for Calibrate Real Estate, they may not be seeing you or myself, but over your shoulder, this wall, we've got to talk about this wall because the journey of an author, I think, is a really interesting one. And I can see some headshots over your shoulder. I can see obviously the advanced artwork on the book. I can see Simplify. Let's talk about your process of just writing a book, because I think there's a lot of real estate agents out there that I've spoken to at different speaking events or just, at a showing that are like, I've always felt like I had a book inside of me. And
yeah,
just pause for a second, celebrate you for having this book launch coming up in June. And then also what it took and some of the things you've learned about being an author.
Well, the first person I talked to about this was Mike McCallum, obviously. I asked him, what do I need to plan on? And he said, you've got to work with A.J. Harper, who actually is Mike McCallum's writing partner. So I hired A.J. She has a 16-week course, and I went through her book, and it's all about creating a life-changing book. And one of the most amazing things that she talked about in the beginning was, you've got to make sure the book's good, because you could write a book in a weekend, but you can't write a good book in a weekend. And so
we've all read a bad book.
Yes. And full disclosure, I wrote a book in a weekend and it wasn't a good book. And it's not one I'm proud of. As far as these sticky notes, that was part of the process that I went through with AJ. If you've ever heard of mind mapping, it's kind of a similar process. I went ahead and figured out what does my reader need to know about this book? And that was one of the most amazing things she talked about is this book is not about something, it's for someone. And the whole key to having a book that's going to sell year after year is to write a book that's going to be life changing. And in the process of doing that, it was a life changing experience for me because it got me really focused on what can I do? How can, when someone reads a book, they're investing a part of their life with you. And so it's a sacred honor for me to be able to take that piece of person's life, and I need to make sure that I'm running the best book possible so that I'm not wasting people's time. So there's a lot of just making sure that this book is written to solve the needs of that person.
Oh, I love that. And it's so wonderful to hear that from an author, that you feel just great to know that they're there for you as the reader. Just like I'm here as a podcast host for the audience. I do this for free. Maybe there's an end game at some point. Same thing with yours, with your book, where you're going to be making some money. But really, I've talked to a lot of authors, and the book is not this groundbreaking. Very rarely is it one of those things where you're making a ton of money from, but it opens all sorts of opportunities. And the point is that you're writing it for someone, not about something. And I love that because oftentimes I think as you're attempting writing something, you're like, okay, what are my facts and my figures? And it almost becomes like a textbook, and it's just not that interesting. And there's no hook to it.
Yeah.
As I read the first chapter of your book, I was just immediately captivated by some of your personal stories, by some of the stories of realtors that you talk with. And I know that this book is going to bless people. Profit First by Mike Michalowicz already blessed me. And I can think of so many other money-oriented books that really changed my mindset. I can think of The Total Money Makeover by Dave Ramsey. I can think of Think and Grow Rich, originally by Napoleon Hill. Amazing books that just change your mindset. And I think it's appropriate, Damon, to share with the audience, a little behind the scenes with the author. You shared with me in the intro of your book, and you'll share with the rest of your audience on June 29th when that book comes out, that you were raised by a single mom.
Yep.
You had an experience of having a paper route with your sister where you'd wake up at 2, 3 in the morning and deliver papers to help mom make ends meet. And then obviously you became an accountant. And so money's kind of always been one of those things. You had a job as a lawn boy, if you will, in your neighborhood, and all these different things that made so much sense at the time because you really needed to be making money for the family. But let's just talk about some of these money habits that sort of get instilled at a very young age and how difficult they are to break, and kind of what your journey was as you really experienced not being able to feel like you were successful as an accountant in the beginning. And some of that is really, I think, entrenched from just a very young period of our life.
Oh yeah, I mean it's money. I mean, you think about all the things we hear growing up. Like one of the things I heard was money doesn't grow on trees, or we can't afford that. And I think of everything I heard growing up that I hated the most is we can't afford that. And that just really struck a nerve with me because I knew somehow that that's not the life I wanted. I mean, we've got so much abundance, and you look at all the opportunities we have. It's just, I mean, that's part of the American dream. We can have everything we want if we're willing to do what it takes. And so, seeing with the parents getting divorced, and we were on welfare for a while, and I hated it. It was one of those things that I wore as a shame. It's like everyone's going to know that I'm the welfare kid, and it didn't have to be that way. And so I really felt like I've got to figure this out. I've got to make sure that money is not a limiting factor in my life. And so I wanted, I did all sorts of different things. I had a cleaning business in college, which was really cool because I learned actually how to run a business by running a business. And then I was like, well, I need to get my education. So I got a bachelor's in accounting. Then I was like, I need more education. So I got an MBA. But then I got done with my MBA and I graduated in 2008, which was the worst timing in the world. And I was like, well, I couldn't get a job. And so I started an accounting practice. I knew that people would buy that. And so 2 years later, I ran into a situation where I had blown through my savings and I had maxed out my credit cards because I wasn't doing those fundamental things. And I would remember this was in July of 2010. I sat in my office and I was like, something is wrong. I can't keep going like this because if I do, I'm going to default on my mortgage and I'm going to put my two-year olds and maybe we have to go live with the in-laws. And the thought that came to my mind came from this book I read 10 years earlier, The Richest Man in Babylon. Pay yourself 10%. And so what I did is I set up a separate bank account and I put 10% of every time I got paid. And it changed my life. And by far, that's probably the best financial move I ever made because in about 6 weeks, I had put 1,500 bucks in that account and it changed my behavior. And the other thing that it did is when I looked at my operating bank account, if the money wasn't there, I said to myself, I can't spend it. I've got to figure out a different way to do business. And it forced me to live within my means. If that hadn't happened, there'd be two other children that I wouldn't have had because I wouldn't have grown my family. So we had two at that time. I've got 4 children right now. And I would not have been willing to add to our family if I hadn't made that change back then, And so I get really touched by that at times because it changed my life. And then when I found out about Profit First, it was like I knew it worked, and I got so excited about it because it expanded beyond just that simple one step, and it got it to where it covered all the basics we need with finances.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that inside journey. I think it's so important to understand where that desire comes from. And it comes from a humble heart. It comes from a place. And I very much felt the same way. And my parents had some real world money problems related to the health of my brother, who has since passed away. I mean, he was constantly in the hospital, and that's hard to shake. And I was the oldest of 6 kids. And they were sending us through private school and all these different things. And I heard we can't afford that a lot. And I just appreciate that. And I heard this behind the answer that you were constantly looking for, how can we afford this? Yeah. How can we build this in? How can we budget? How can we plan? How can we make sure that Christmas doesn't come by surprise this year? It never does, but everybody's surprised when all of a sudden the Christmas bill comes and it's like, well, maybe if you planned a little bit better.
Something Christmas I picked up the same time every year.
Yes, that's exactly right. So does tax day, unless you're thinking
except
about
for last year.
Yeah, exactly.
It got bumped because of COVID.
But one other thing, just little hook that I really appreciated as I was reading Profit First for Real Estate Agents, the advanced copy. And you can get that June 29th, such a great copy to read through. One of the things that I really appreciate is that you share in the book that we've got all of these different things that sort of add up to our money habits, but you can change them. You can change your mindset. You can change your thought process about how you treat money, and you can do it today. You can go from being in debt. You can go from having student loans and credit card bills, and you've got this lease that you've got an issue with on your car maybe, and you can go and you can change all of that right away. And it just happens with these incremental steps, one by one, putting things in one foot in front of the other. One final example before we go into the end of our show, Damon, is and I don't know why I've never heard this, and I appreciate it. I'm a dad with 3 kids. My wife and I have 3 kids. You've got 4 kids, and you talk about the concept of cleaning your room, right?
Yeah.
And this is something that every one of us as a little kid dreaded, but I had never heard of this before. And it's so simple, just like everything that's evergreen, everything that is pure. All of God and grandma's advice is these little pithy evergreen things. And if you're trying to clean your room and it's a mess, instead of trying to do it all in one fell swoop, what do? You do it bit by bit, a little bit, a few minutes at a time over the course of several days, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And that's, it's a lot easier to say, oh, I've only got to do this. So, I mean, I'll even do this as like, I'm just going to pick up one thing. Every time I get from my desk, I'm going to put it up and I'm going to throw it away or something like that. And if we just focus on one thing at a time, it's a lot easier to get the job done because how many of us have a garage that's full of garbage, right? And it's just like you go in there like, I'll never get anything done. I think I need to go get that tub of ice cream to make me feel better. Um, so really, I mean, that's like the whole idea of if we want to look at a simple thing to improve our finances, set up a savings account and put $10 in there, and then next month put another $10, and we'll never miss the money. And then we'll realize, oh, well, what if I put $11 or $20? It's just, and this is one thing I love to say is it's like the direction is more important than the speed.
I love that. Let's repeat that. The direction is more important than speed.
Yes. Yeah. And you know, there's an instance. So if we're going in the right direction, all we have to do is just keep doing it. But if we're going in the wrong direction, it doesn't matter how fast we're going, right? So if I'm in North Carolina and you're in Colorado. Well, if I wanted to get to you, Kyle, if I move one foot at a time, one step at a time, eventually I'll get there. But if I go east, I'm going to drown, right?
You're going the wrong way.
Yeah, and let's say I do it 100 miles an hour going east, I'm going into the Atlantic Ocean. That's not doing me any good. But if I'm going one step forward, I can do that, you know, and it may take me, 10 years, but at least I'm not drowning.
I love all these examples, and they're great reminders of that visual as you step into your garage and you see all this junk, all this overflow, and your car has been parked outside for months and years. It's that feeling of overwhelm. Yeah. And I think this book is a tool like a lot of great books out there. And I do believe that you've written a great book, Damon, and I'm so excited for June 29th, 2021, is that you're helping someone solve a problem. And that problem is feeling overwhelmed of not knowing what to do next and feeling like money is so complicated and so sophisticated that it can't be simple. And it's the simplest step, like you said, of opening up a savings account, using the envelope system by taking all these different bank accounts and just allocating funds in there and saying, we're not spending more than what's in that account. Yeah. And you're going to delay that gratification of spending sometimes, because we know that there's a lot of realtors out there that love to spend some money.
Well, we all love to. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, we're towards the end of our show. We've got a few minutes left, Damon, and I ask all of my guests 2 final questions. You ready? A little bit of a rapid fire here, but these are deep, so get prepared. All right. Yeah. Okay. The first question comes from a song that I personally just really enjoy called Dear Younger Me. The writer of the song is actually writing a letter to themselves. And it's sort of this juxtaposition. They're saying, would I give myself different advice now that I know what I know? If I could go back and talk to myself, 20 years ago, would I do anything different? Would I say go left instead of right? Would I say, meet this person instead of that person? It's just such a funny kind of juxtaposition, because I think we all think about that, especially when something goes wrong. And when something like the idea of profiting first and our money habits, when they don't go so well, we think about, man, I wish I would have known that when I was younger. So I've dubbed this question, the advice you wish you knew when you were 22. So Damon, if you've got someone in that book line in July or August that comes up to you and they're in their 20s and they say, Damon, I'm in my 20s, I'm a hustler. What's the advice that you would give to someone in their 20s?
Well, this is actually a piece of advice I got from Dave Jenks, which is, one of the most amazing people. He's written so many great books, the Bible of real estate, millionaire real estate agent. And I actually had the opportunity to have a private conversation with him. And the thing he told me was, let fear be your compass. It just really stuck to me, because everything that I've done that's where I've made a big difference in my life, there was fear before that. It's scary a lot of times, especially in the real estate world and the business world. We're constantly having to put ourselves out of the comfort zone. And so if anything, now when I recognize I'm scared about something, that's an indicator to me that that's something I need to embrace, and I need to go after it with everything I've got. Now, I haven't always done that, but when I've done it, it's really paid off. And sometimes I failed miserably as a result of it. But something always comes great out of pushing myself out of that comfort zone. So let fear be your compass.
It's a great reminder to step into fear, step towards fear. And it's such an opposing thought process, right? Because none of us wants to have an ouchie moment, and that fear is your mind telling you that there's danger. But
Yeah.
on the other side of that danger, there's so many wonderful things. And it's easier to say that when you've lived some life, you've got some gray hairs or you've lost some hair, that it's easier to say that now than when you're in your 20s. So great advice. Last question is something that's evolved. So one of my personal relationships, my career coach, this guy named Chris Oakley, was episode 5 of our podcast. And Chris tragically passed away about a year ago. His answer to that question, and the way that I continue to live out his memory, was actually that he was in this mentoring group in his 20s. The leader of the mentoring group had them read a book called The Principle of the Path by Andy Stanley. And in the book, Andy Stanley encourages his readers to write their own obituary. So this is kind of that Stephen Covey 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, think of the end in mind type of question. I have twisted this just a little bit. If you were to have a loved one deliver your eulogy, because that's a little bit more personal than like a newspaper person writing your obituary, right? What would you hope that they would say about your legacy if they were delivering your eulogy?
Well, that's amazing thing about having written this book is it really got me to, that life-changing thing we talked about. I think that the biggest thing that it got me to is really clarifying what's important to me. So the big thing that I want to be known for is I help people simplify money.
I love it. Short and sweet, and such a great message for everybody. Make sure if you're listening to this and you want to learn more about Profit First for real estate agents, go to the website Get Profit First. That's GET for getprofitfirst.com. You can check out Damon Yudichak. I'll tell you, I have pronounced his name correctly a few times now, and I feel very good about that little pat on the back. Yudichak is Yudichak. A couple of guys with real interesting names, Malnati and Yudichak. So check out Damon Yudichak on Instagram and Facebook. And as I love to say for our podcast audience, thanks for tuning in. Damon Yudichak's got this book coming out. So excited for you, buddy. June 29th. Go out and get that book, Profit First for Real Estate Agents. We're going to be promoting this. There's going to be some advanced copies, obviously pre-released. Let's get this book as a bestseller status. I would love to be a part of that. Damon, thank you for your time today. Thank you to Ann Russell and Kayla Davis for booking this podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Malnati, and as I love to say, we will see you around the neighborhood. Thanks, everybody.